following statement is released anonymously as property of the people of the United States in regards to a recently made, particularly telling attempt to corral the American workforce into blind obedience. In the interest of free speech, I encourage you who hear this to duplicate it as though it were your own. Spread the message to everyone you can in its original format. The script has been reviewed with the intention of keeping focus on the economic issues which affect everyone under U.S. citizenship. To politically divide this message any further with any issue is to degrade the solemnity of its meaning and is contrary to the interest of increasing wages. This is done this way so as to prevent discrimination against any U.S. citizen, regardless of other identifying characteristics. Fox News asks, how many hours in a solid workday? That's a fair question, and one that I would like to rephrase to be a bit more accurate to the point. How many hours are in a solid work week? The reason it's phrased this way is because obviously most work schedules run on a weekly, not daily basis. By quantifying the measurement to reflect that, we can more easily look at the subject for what it is. And for many, that is a revolving cycle between work and home, check to check. Anyway, our current society models a typical work week first introduced by the Ford Motor Company, and I'm sure we all know Ford. They're in the process of paying back a $6 billion bailout from 2009, so probably not the most effective at running a for-profit company, but that's the origin of the 40-hour, 5-day work week. May 1st, 1926. Almost 100 years old. Not many productive workplaces using 100-year-old technology, but perhaps corporate policies only need to adapt every 500 years. So now we've established that a 40-hour work week or more is the standard based on 96-year-old practices. And it's a testament to the strength of the workforce that they've done it this long, with productivity exponentially improving in the 70s and 80s as technology was being quickly developed into what it is today. Since then, profit increases have remained exclusively known by those in the financially elite class of citizen. That all considered, I'd like to dive a little deeper into this by addressing the subject of minimum wage. Currently, as it stands, the expectation of the worker is that as an employee doing honest work of any skill level within a 40-hour work week making the minimum wage, you will be able to provide for yourself and your family a few basics of life. That has persisted into today's hustle culture. Let's stick to the basic economic issues here. To have a minimum wage which provides less is an obvious problem, and this is where the term wage slave comes from. It is a description of a person working an underpaid job which they are simultaneously unable to leave in good conscience due to financial insecurity, which has become a trademark result for people in these jobs, keeps them shackled to their positions by manipulating hardwired biological instincts which we all have. And to pose the question, why not just quit, is a coy and petty argument when we both know that for many, that would mean going without medication, heat, food for their children, a home to go back to after the workday. So practically, that is no choice at all. Science, as we understand it today, depicts very clearly a different decision-making process when a person is faced with obtaining a means of survival versus when a person is financially secure enough to know their well-being, their family's well-being, is not in immediate jeopardy. And taking care of our own is an ideal that is alive and well in the working class, though I'm not sure the same can be said about the well-compensated political allies to corporations. It is pure irony that if one would consider well-compensated to be on a relative spectrum, there is only math speaking the reality that a news anchor's salary is not comparable to the billions or trillions of US dollars which some may, as it stands, legally lay claim to. Which brings us back to the core issue of commensurate compensation for work and a livable minimum wage. As quoted directly from the Economic Policy Institute's website, CEO compensation compensation has grown 940% since 1978, while worker compensation has risen only 12% during that time. End quote. At that same time, the average sales price of houses sold in the United States, to summarize the information displayed in this graph, which relied on data collected as part of the U.S. Census, has increased by 630%. Housing prices up 630%. To put that in an even clearer light, inflation has seen a multiple 100% increase in that time from then till now as well. It now takes $4.28 to equal the purchasing power of $1 in 1978. This, as well as all this other information, was found publicly viewable online in a variety of formats from a variety of publishers. I urge you, do your own research. So back to the core question of the interview here, which it seems there's only one, and after that, the rest of the time was spent discrediting your interviewee and making a mockery of them. An underhanded use of the opportunity to sponsor your viewership in my eyes, given that Fox deliberately interviewed someone they knew they could easily discredit, and for the purpose of disorganizing what is an incredibly important movement in the country that it calls home. And also that by this time next year, houses will cost more, CEO wages will go up another couple dozen%, while the percent increases in real wages for workers will remain in the same single digits. Single digits being what the data presented by the Congressional Research Service says about trends from 1978 to 2019 here. In further regard to the wage trends from 1978 to 2019, the federal minimum wage has remained at $7.25 since 2009, circa Ford Motors bailout. It seems reasonably likely that Antiwork had gotten bigger because people are feeling real-time consequences of long-standing neglect at the core of our workforce. And when one spends all week under the enthrallment of hardwired survival mechanisms, working jobs that fail to provide sufficient wages to cover basic needs, there is an only natural disinterest in continuing to clock in for the already wealthy to absorb all the benefits of their continued labor. There is nothing overtly entitled or lazy about demanding a basic level of sustainable income in exchange for a person's work. In fact, I'd assert that based on studies conducted by various independent organizations, examples of workers' reform in other countries, and common sense, that when a workforce isn't struggling to survive, they have the capacity to produce more overall and require less government aid in the form of other social welfare programs. Again, good for all invested parties. We as a people want to work, want to see our economy recover, and want to see the benefits of being engaged in that way. It's come to an unfortunate point in society where wealth has become so vastly disparate for so long that the least educated in our workforce struggle to get safe footing on which they could seek a higher education, which I believe the stewardship of, to many who are educated, is within the realm of human responsibility and obligation. The U.S. citizen deserves a more fairly constructed, socially equitable country wherein social mobility is a real possibility to the deserving who seek it. One where a person can go out and work a full-time job and enjoy an independent, autonomous lifestyle outside of work. One where the majority of workers aren't on a trajectory to be left struggling to survive in a rapidly changing world, where students aren't killing themselves, stressed out to the max by debt and wages that aren't scaling with the times. One where parents aren't forced to choose who gets medical care in the family and ration off food one check at a time. A nation united by its people we can trust that at the end of the day is still a democracy by the people, for the people, which includes in its successes everyone that helped along the way. However seemingly insignificant the work of a minimum wage job may seem to some, the average person is not here to be exploited for their time and labor like some tool along for the ride, courtesy of the never-widening wage gap. Especially when we have the capacity to automate many of the positions that don't require a person's presence. And just as an afterthought, inflation has gone up 7% in December 2021 alone. Did anyone get a 7% raise? If that trend continues, that's the same as talking about the USD losing 84% of its value in just 1 year. Are the corporations lining up to give every employee an 84% raise, or what? If there really is such a need for you to humiliate and bully a well-meaning, presumably law-abiding citizen of your own country, there must be some concern regarding the validity of the workers' rights movement coming from Fox News. After all, airtime isn't free, and it's not ran by volunteers or publicly elected officials. So I'm thinking this whole fiasco went down because corporate America wants to nip it in the bud. And the reason it wants to do that, the reason it just used Mr. Waters as a tool to silence its opposition, is because as soon as the majority of the workforce wakes up and realizes their situation is not looking good, the companies that have been bleeding them dry for generations will have to adjust wages. The politicians and media outlets that have been enabling this exploitation of the American people will have to face those very same people standing where they've been left behind in '78. America, its workforce, its people, each of us are the fingers and toes of a sleeping giant. And I don't know about you, and I'm not speaking for an entire subreddit, but when superfunded media organizations are reduced to using airtime to pick on its own citizenship, all while the everyday worker is still trying to stomach the last few years, no less, I think it's time for us as a country to wake up. These news outlets don't care about the viewers any more than their interviewees, and no more than the faceless corporations care for their workers. That should be clear as day. Make the economic adjustments needed, and do not politicize this argument further than the measurable economic data permits, so we can begin to move forward as a sovereign people. Though we may debate, argue, and disagree, we must put aside our various causes and differences to address this issue which concerns us all, for a nation divided against itself cannot stand.